righty, well, let's get started here. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our conversation today from map drives to modern teams. We're going to be fixing file chaos without slowing down work. We're going to explore how we can better manage file chaos. We want to get this from file chaos to data harmony. We want to increase some efficiencies, and we want to work to get the most out of our file services. Just want to say hello. My name is Rob Schenk. I'm with Intelligent Technical Solutions. We specialize in helping small and medium-sized businesses thrive by managing and securing their technology. A few housekeeping notes. Conversation should run about 30 or so minutes. We'll be around to answer some questions at the end. Conversation will be recorded. If you happen to have any questions, you can go ahead and pop them into the Zoom Q&A box there, and we're happy to handle those and answer those questions at the end. So let's get started here. You'll notice a QR code in the lower right corner. That's going to lead to a special offer for attendees of the webinar. In case you need to leave earlier, you can go ahead and scan that. For today's discussion, I'm looking forward to welcoming our special guest, Kevin Soohoo. He's head of global AEC practice at Egnyte, and he's leveraging over 20 years of industry experience to advance data management, security, and governance for AEC firms worldwide. So beyond corporate leadership, currently serves as an advisor to several construction technology startups, and he's a member of the AGC Technology Conference Steering Committee. So Kevin, welcome. I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, glad to be here, Ro. Thank you.
Alrighty, so let's get started here. So quick overview of an agenda today. We'll be talking through why file systems become a growth constraint for businesses. We'll talk through some of the most common symptoms that we often see as firms start to scale. We'll talk through what good looks like, especially in a modern file environment. And we'll talk through kind of collaboration, cybersecurity, and AI considerations, and think about how we address next steps. So let's get started here. So Kevin, foundational question. So why do file systems matter so much in modern organizations? Can you kind of just dig into why it's such a critical, but it also a messy part of daily operations?
Yeah, it's the thing that no one necessarily gets excited about, but from where we sit, that this is the core for a lot of firms, right? This is where you're going to be interacting with a file system, and in more cases than not, maybe 3 file systems, 5 or 10. But this is something that you're ultimately accessing every day from your laptop, from your mobile device, from the field, right? In between, when you're on travel or in the office. And so this is where, again, a lot of your work is being sourced from in the terms of like working through documents. And then I think another part of it, just as a kind of a final note here, is like this is really thinking about the accumulation of your company's history, the knowledge that until recently, aka AI, has been really like locked away. So a lot of exciting things here when we think about what the file system could represent for the modern firm.
Yeah, for sure. And we're seeing like important points there. Like we're also seeing like data volumes dramatically spiking. I mean, like just like you get the volume of data that we kind of work through. We're doing a lot of testing, a lot of research, creates a lot of kind of file bloat. And then how do you kind of manage, look through, find, discover, secure, and it kind of starts to create some constraint challenges. And ultimately, when you're trying to like go around trying to find different files from you don't know where they are, it becomes a productivity halt and slowdown. So can you walk us through like what are the most common signs that we see in a lot of environments where they're just challenging and things start to break down? What do you see on your side?
Right. Yeah. So let me first validate your note about the data exploding, especially for architecture, engineering, and construction firms. We did a study a few years ago where we saw Ignite customers coming onto our platform. They since 2018, they needed 800% more storage coming onto the platform. So that's massive. Like in many ways, a lot of these firms are data companies. And so to your point, what are the symptoms when you don't act like a data company? You're growing, your employee footprint might be getting bigger. But I think the first and foremost is like, yeah, version, confidence in the latest version. Like, do we think about Microsoft alone, right? You have SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. You might be using Autodesk, you might be using Procore, you might be using Bluebeam. The list could go on and on. So where is that file? Where is the latest version? And if you're doing work like in the field, if you're a trade contractor, that's critically important because now you're installing things, do it wrong, it's going to be on your dime. So I think that's one where we see like the version, just non-confidence, and the latest one is a big one. Sharing becomes really interesting too, right? You share links, you often forget they're there after the project is done. So now you've got exposure files that should have been time-based, but now they're just sitting out in perpetuity. And then we also, as you said, large files are getting more prevalent. You've got laser scans, 4K, 8K footage now going around, trying to move those files when you capture it from the field to the office. And so that's a lot of time someone's wasting, really sitting around, moving, trying to just simply uploading. So you've got all these symptoms in which, as you said, productivity. And I know the industry likes to use productivity in a lot of different slices, but certainly the lack of the right document at the right time, sitting around waiting to move big files around, those are really common symptoms we'll see a lot.
Sure. So once the symptoms start showing up, I think from an end user perspective, it starts to get frustrating. Can't find the stuff. You're spending a lot of time. It becomes a real kind of constraint on your productivity. Ultimately, becomes a scaling issue for the business. Uh, can you what are some of the choke points where you often see folks getting stuck on? Like where data volumes are coming down soon, as we talked about. Like this is going to just continue to kind of just expand and grow exponentially. Like what do you see as common choke points?
Yeah, so I think the people aspect is really interesting, right? We've got firms that are growing. We actually had a case study of a customer in which they're based in Cincinnati and they're growing, and hiring strictly, within their own city became a constraint, right? Because they were constrained also by their previous file system, being not scalable, not being in the cloud and so forth. And so in their case, they're like, hey, we can actually, with Egnyte now, having a cloud-based file system that does a lot more than that, but just being able to simply create an opportunity where they can hire outside their immediate footprint was a big overcoming a real big challenge for them in their growth. So there's that people aspect that, you can get more people and different geographies involved. They can still collaborate. And I think the other thing is that, we do see a lot of firms that are still holding on to, some semblance of a on-prem server. In fact, we actually had a few meetings earlier this week where there's still quite a few folks on premise servers trying to figure out how to off ramp into the cloud. And now you've got kind of various states of like, oh, we're kind of in the cloud, we're kind of not. And your users now are kind of like, where do I go? Do I go here? Do I go back to my VPN? And so you've got a lot of confusion. Ultimately, as we kind of said in the first one, there's a time element that are really starting to multiply, and it's getting worse.
And then we've also seen a lot of in our space, a lot of merger and acquisition. And so how does that impact you? I'm imagining like, trying to, again, bring kind of different data sets together in a unified way. Maybe you can talk
Yeah.
through that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good one. The due diligence, if you will, like what is in the data when you're doing a buy or a sell, often is like a secondary thing, right? They're worried about the deal, but their data is actually something that can actually hold up a deal in a lot of cases. So being able to understand what you're acquiring or how you're, as if you're trying to sell, hey, what is the state of your data? In your files. And so we have this opportunity now where at this point we have data due diligence. In some cases, it could take, 3 months, 4 months, where now we have examples in some of the tools that we offer in which you can do it in 2 weeks. And so having the ability to understand what's in your data, whether you're in a buy or in a sell mode, is actually advantageous and often again a secondary thought.
Yeah. But practically speaking, we talked about a couple of different data silos that we often see. You mentioned, like Outlook or SharePoint or OneDrive or the file server. How do these like silos end up forming, and like why do they create so much operational friction for companies?
Oh, right. Yeah. So the integration, I think, story is another piece that often we're like just not really paying attention to. So you're right. We got Microsoft that probably represents a large chunk of a lot of firms' tech stacks. And you also have a lot of AEC specific solutions that are part of the tech stack. And Microsoft doesn't necessarily think about AEC, so there's not a lot of integrations necessarily coming out of Microsoft, but that's just one, right? We've got opportunities where in some cases you may have, as I said earlier, 10, 12, 15 places where you could store information, have files hiding in different places. And without any integration, and as you said, these silos start to proliferate. And now we're just kind of recycling into that whole like, okay, I got so many systems now. I'm trying to get through the project, and we're back to that problem with time is being wasted. But even maybe a further point is now data is being duplicated because now we can't integrate things. We're clogging up our inbox with attachments as a result, and so that's another issue where you don't want to have unnecessary versions or copies of things because in the field, again, if you're building off of an old copy and you're putting a pipe or conduit and 20 feet over in the wrong place, that's a very costly mistake. And it
Yeah,
could be because you're in the wrong system pulling the files.
for sure. So we think we have a good understanding of like, how this type of kind of data chaos kind of forms. So at this point, like, let's maybe we can talk about resetting this. So let's talk of what does good look like and what does a well-designed modern file system provide? Making kind of paint that picture for us. What's possible?
Yeah, I think and the good is, fairly, I'll say a little bit subjective, but I think from where we sit, good is not going to be one, central system, right? I don't think anyone's naive to say one file system that rule them all, but I think good should be down to a handful. So again, not to say that we are, the ultimate answer to everything, but we have firms, customers that are like, oh yeah, with Egnyte plus my other, primary systems, we're down to maybe 5 or 6 places. And that's pretty good, I think, right? When you have 12, 15, 20 plus, that's definitely not good because now, again, back to our earlier points, things are all over the place. You don't know who owns things. Permissions could be out of whack. So I think good is getting it consolidated enough, not to just one. That's really impossible, but clearly, the Microsoft pieces are important. You can't get rid of it. But again, what integrations can you leverage? So good is, again, trying to make sure you have just enough systems, but not too many, and that integrations are being leveraged across those systems so that they do talk, and you're not creating that duplicative data state that could really hurt you. Um, I think the other part of it, going back to the user side, is just access. Accessing things from anywhere is a easy enough statement, yet it's kind of hard for a lot of firms. And so I think that user side of the convenience of can I get it again on the road on my mobile device? Can I pull up a bid on the fly in front of my customer because I forgot my laptop? And those are the other, I think, definitions of good that you just don't have to go through. There's really no friction to getting the files you need, no matter where you are, no matter what device you're using, and even no matter how big the file size is. So I think there'd be two really interesting sort of definitions that we would aspire toward of what
Hmm.
good is. And I think the other part is just that collaboration piece. It's that seamless collaboration in which, you're able to, with combination of the integrations, the accessibility, right now being able to work on files with your other peers, right? So we've got customers that have 3 or 4 offices and they're saying things like for the first time ever, because we're all on a single, at least a cloud this storage system, and they have other systems, don't get me wrong, but with a cloud storage system that's very collaborative, you can work on your Microsoft files together, that those 3 or 4 offices can now actually act as one and design as one virtual team versus, handing things off. And so I think the collaboration piece is also very important to point to what a good setup would look like.
Can you talk through like so if we're setting up a foundational system like this, how do you structure it? How do you classify the data? How do you organize it so it's in a state that's optimal for collaboration and efficiency?
Yeah, yeah, that's becoming really important now, right? When we have that two-letter word coming down, which I know we'll touch on in a slide or two, but
Yeah.
just simply storing things and having it accessible and collaborative is just the beginning pieces. So as you're setting things up, right, having this idea that not all data is necessarily equal. We're going to have data that might be more sensitive in nature. We've got projects you might be doing data centers or hospitals. Those are sensitive in nature. You can't necessarily treat those the same way as you're treating the project for a retail store, for example. So the ability to just make sure that you're looking at the data, understanding the different permission sets, and that your system can support that. We call it role-based in many cases. Role-based permissioning would be
Mhm.
another really important piece to make sure you have in your file system.
How does search tie into this? Like you're
That's
moving
yeah.
you're moving all these different files, you're organizing them, and at that point, hey, I still need to be able to find the file quickly. How does that work in a modern system? Like
Yeah, that's a
what should we expect from hey, I want to find something really quickly?
yeah, that's a good one. It's often an overlooked thing that we do really well. That tends not to necessarily be brought up, but once someone realizes, hey, search in its current state is not great. In its current state before having something like Ignite, it's Control F and it's keyword hunting. And now you're just hoping you either have the right word and then file name or some other the luck in which you hit the thing, right? So keyword hunting is kind of what I would characterize as what's before, but now
Mhm.
with the ability, and especially with systems like ours and Ignite, indexing every file, right, and the contents therein. So we're not strictly keyword hunting anymore. We're actually looking and returning results based on content. So whether it's in your Word file, Excel file, even drawing files, a lot of these special AEC file formats, we're able to index them, and actually those search results are pretty lightning fast. We've had a couple of stories where someone would launch a search in their desktop and they would go to lunch and come back and it's still like chugging away trying to find results. And then with the Ignite, which has indexed everything, there it's like 3 minutes or faster. And so now you've got this really ability to be really smart with your search. Um, the other newer thing that we're really excited about is being able to search on like recordings, which have been transcribed, and images. So we're looking for searching for images because it's really hard to describe images, but we can do that
Sure.
now. So searching not just on like your typical back office files or drawings, but also multimedia is an opportunity that again could save someone a lot of time.
Yeah, that's a cool option for sure. So let's pivot over to cybersecurity. So you can't turn on the news without hearing about the latest cyber attack. How, like, yeah, if I'm a regulated industry, if I have very sensitive data file types, how does that work within this environment, and how does a kind of a modern file system kind of protect against, we hear about ransomware and getting your data encrypted, insider threats, things like that. How does this type of system work
Sure.
through those kind of challenges?
Yeah, I mean, and all these are critically important, and the industry has been slow to sort of rally around these, but cybersecurity, the first one is really this ability to make sure you have resilience, right? I don't think anyone's going to say I'm 100% impervious. I cannot have 100% defense, but if something does happen, what is your resiliency plan? What is your recoverability plan? For systems like Ignite, when it comes to recoverability, there's actually 4 layers for which you could, really think about that resilience factor, right? There's the versioning aspect. Everything's versioned no matter what. So if it's changed, if one letter's changed, it's versioned. So if that file were lost, you can go back to a prior version. Then there's this opportunity where we have snapshots. And so snapshots takes images of your whole entire environment. And so if something were to happen in there, we could also go back and get a snapshot. And then, of course, there's our professional services teams that can also go even deeper into going and recovering your files. So, from one point of view, that's like multiple layers of resiliency. The other part with Ignite, at least, is that we're an object store. So things like ransomware don't spread, right? So yes, it can show up. It has shown up, but the system recognizes the behaviors. Hey, it's not possible that somebody could change, 500 files, 5,000 files in like 3 seconds. So behaviors like that get flagged in our system. The user gets shut down. Again, things don't spread because it's an object store. And so there's some inherent advantages to at least the Ignite architecture to also um, prevent that. And then behaviorally speaking, you said insider threats. That's another form of a threat, right? In which we also look at behaviors in which a user is suddenly downloading 2, 3 times more than their daily threshold. That starts to show up as suspicious behavior. And that often leads to, yeah, they're going to leave, they're taking customer files, And we can identify that because, again, that behavior in which they're suddenly accessing a lot more files than they normally do on a daily basis. We actually threshold every single user's daily routine. And so if someone starts to spike, that sets off an alarm.
Yeah, you mentioned a kind of insider thread. This can be also like as an example, recently we did a classification scan on for one of our kind of prospects we were working with. They had a whole series of confidential information that was kind of like was sitting on kind of company machines. So credit card information, social security numbers, personal information that they had no idea was kind of running around and sitting on machines. You know, if someone gets into that environment, does a scan similar to what we did. Hey, that's an opportunity to kind of exfiltrate or suck that data out of the network and use that as leverage during a cybersecurity incident. Um, this seems also kind of be the I think the kind of the data sprawl, file sprawl is a big issue for many businesses but they just generally speaking don't have a clear awareness of where this data lives unless they start doing some discovery to understand where the stuff lives and then the risk associated with that stuff getting out and them not being aware of it.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of, again, history in companies, and files get dumped in places that you forget. And again, that two-letter word coming around, this thing eats everything. So you got
Yeah.
to be really careful and conscious about, what is getting fed and what is the state of your data. We actually got to do an analogy with like Lego bricks being your data. If you got a big pile of bricks and you don't know what's in it, it's like, what hope do you have, to build that Lego model? It's the same thing with sort of that data state. If it's a mess now, garbage in, garbage out is really what's going to come down to.
Yeah. Cool. Let's talk through, you mentioned AI a couple of times. There's a lot of firms that are getting interested in becoming AI ready. How can they leverage AI for competitive advantage here? Like, what's the impact of AI on a modern file system?
Right. So, as I alluded to in the beginning, like the file system in many ways is the accumulated knowledge of your firm's history, projects, and things of that nature. And and before AI became a thing, that was largely locked away. It was in files, probably forgotten. There may be a you know some 20-year designer sitting in the back room that might remember everything, and he's the go-to guy. He's the AI at some point, and at some point he retires and like, oh, what do we do now? So yeah, that file system is really the basis, and we believe to be a major source of any real AI effort, right? You don't, this AI thing is not a magic bullet. It's not going to automatically fix the state of your data, but it's going to more or less, quote unquote, interpret the data that you fed it and provide, responses, whether it's things like, when did we do a project with so and so owner and how much was the award? Or what was the scope of this project? What was the mechanicals? And so using AI to provide answers to that and not depending on that 20-year designer sitting in the back room is a huge opportunity. And it's also a lot faster, to be honest, too. But I think that the modern file system of today becomes a very critical piece to a successful AI journey, right? And again, the classification, what are we feeding this thing? How much sensitive data do we have in there? What risks do we have? Like the credit cards, that's a PCI compliance violation, right? That's a heavy per infraction fine. So, you know, preventing that from happening and classifying all that data that's sitting in your file system is what we believe to be a really critical prerequisite to making sure that you have a good experience with AI. You don't overexpose things, you don't create unnecessary risk. But
Yeah,
make no mistake, it's happening now. There's hundreds of startups right now entering the space with solutions like this. We have our own native ones in it too. And I think the other, one thing to make sure is as you're working with whoever AI solution you have, is to understand what are they doing with your data, because you're essentially in most cases offloading data to them. What is their privacy policies? Are they sharing your data? How long are they keeping it? For what reasons? And so these are really good questions that we would want to hope any firm would ask as when it comes to the notion of, hey, I'm going to give you my data in the purposes of making whatever AI tool work.
for sure. So it really kind of fundamentally comes down to having a good foundational setup that you are then layering on the AI workflows on top of to make sure that things are organized, that you're protected, that things are set up efficiently. and you can really leverage the power of that type of solution. Right?
Yeah,
All
we're
right.
excited. AI is a big it's going to be a game changer, but there's going to be a right and there's going to be a wrong way. And again, I can't say it enough. Like getting your data in order, which again is hinged on your file system, is a big deal. And if you got just a basic file system that's all it does, then that's a real problem.
Yeah. Well, sounds cool. So let's talk through like, what we can do next here. So we've kind of covered the kind of journey from end to end. We started off with, you know, large repositories, kind of disparate file sets. We've put them into a modern file system. We've leveraged some capabilities of AI because you've gone through kind of fundamental kind of classification process. Uh, so let's talk about where we can go from here. So for anyone who wants to get their environment mapped and get a better understanding of how they're set up and what would it take to go ahead and move towards a modern file system, we're here to help you get started with that process. So one simple step here, you can go ahead and scan that QR code that's there. You can go ahead and drop us an email at secure@itsasap.com, and we're happy to go ahead and do a complimentary discovery assessment process for you. Have ask you some questions around how you're currently set up, and provide you with a roadmap of what it would take to get to a modern file system and really leverage the benefits that Kevin has really been talking through today. So I guess with that, there are a couple questions have come in, Kevin. So I want to see if we can maybe spend a few minutes on that. Um, let's see. First question. We're currently using SharePoint for some common file sharing. How does a system like this differ from a SharePoint? Why your this kind of a modern file system versus SharePoint? What's the differences? What's the benefits? What should I
Yeah,
consider?
that's a conversation we get into a lot. I would probably start with like, I don't think SharePoint was necessarily designed to be a file system. It's an intranet. I would totally concede, and it's great to use it for what it was meant to. But yes, we have seen firms start to really use it as a file system. So what happens, right? We know from the many, many, many conversations we have, with SharePoint, it starts to have limitations around storage and capacity. So if anyone's on SharePoint, and you're at a certain size, you probably have multiple SharePoint sites. And SharePoint sites then start to proliferate. The larger you get, the more offices you might have, the larger staff, as we talked about earlier. And now you have this almost even inside of a Microsoft environment, silos of information. It was SharePoint environment, silos of information, because now you've got these SharePoint sites. You may or may not have consistent permissions through those SharePoint sites. You have projects sprawled out over those SharePoint sites. And so that kind of, and the starting point, once firms get to a certain size, really start to understand that becomes a real problem. And I think the other part we hear a lot with SharePoint is once you start to exceed a certain threshold in storage, you're paying for, I guess they call overages, and those are astronomically more expensive. And that becomes really untenable for firms who are continuing to grow. As I said, we have seen 800% increase, and we don't necessarily we don't penalize for that growth storage. But if you're in a SharePoint environment, I think it's kind of safe to say there's a bit of a penalty once you start growing too. And then the last I would say is just the integrations, at least natively with micro. There's a lot of third parties I would say, but native integrations with Procore or Autodesk or name your other AEC application, they largely don't exist. And when you're depending on a third party integration, I think we have seen things can break. They don't scale and things get dropped. And so, the lack of native integrations is probably a third, I would say, when we think about SharePoint, is where we tend to come out a bit ahead.
Great, thanks for that. Next question: how does it work with remote users? And what if they're in like low bandwidth environments? How does that kind of function? How does that work?
Yeah, so Ignite in its really early days has filed a few different patents, in fact, that dealt with algorithmic syncing in specifically in low bandwidth environments. So one of the early use cases for Ignite. So Ignite's been around since 2007. Up until 2021, it was kind of a one size fits all. But in that whole one size fits all, this notion like, hey, we can support files in low bandwidth environments was really important for construction firms. You had job site trailers. We're thinking about like early pre-COVID, you might be on a 4G, 3G connection. It's a little wire running across the parking lot, right? It's not super strong, but that became a really strong use case for a lot of general contractors that deploy job site trailers. And so, having that ability became really important. early on, and then we've continued to evolve that idea into different file caching schemes. We can, when files are changing, we're syncing the deltas only. We're not shooting the whole file across. We now have file caching capabilities. We're effectively streaming files. Think about your 3,000 page PDF file, things of that nature, which can open pretty much like it's local to you because we're now streaming those blocks down. And so that's a real opportunity, where we can get more efficient in handling these files. And also, again, from really anywhere, any device kind of a situation.
Cool. Another question. How confident or how successful are you in access removal at a project's close?
Yeah, so that's a really good one. Since 2021 and onwards, we verticalized our solution set. And so for AEC, because we verticalized, we're now afforded the opportunity to actually release many specific features that support different project workflows. I would be very careful to say we are not a project management system, but we support a lot of project workflows. One of which, to your question, is the closeout process. And so if you look at Egnyte, you would have actual regular folders and you'd have project folders. And project folders have several additional attributes like project start, project close. There's an address to sync for photographs in the field. But the one part that really matters to the question is when we hit that project close date, there's a trigger that says, do you want to close off all the shared links to all your external users? Beyond that, there's actually a document retention policy that you can apply. So typically projects have need to be retained usually for 7 years, longer if it's military federal, but even in within that context of the warranty period, you can even apply policies for which a project can be effectively locked down for a predetermined period of time, typically 7 years, before it can be actually moved. But it's the whole get rid of the links at project close, retain until you need to, and that's where we start to see this opportunity for this automation of that closeout and even through the warranty period, like 7 years later.
Gotcha. Cool. Another question. How can we get our leadership to understand that completing a migration is extremely important? What has been a successful way to show ROI here, asking for a friend who's stuck mid-migration for too long?
Oh, I'm assuming this is a mid-migration on Ignite. I would
Or
have to
just, or let's just assume it's mid-migration. We don't know, like, forget the solution. Like, just from a big picture perspective, how would you talk to leadership if they're not kind of not seeing the benefits of a consolidation process or an optimization to a model
Oh,
file
wow, that
system?
that can go a lot of ways. We'd have to that could be it depends, I guess. I guess I'll try to offer. So, the mid-migration, if the results aren't showing up, I think it was in some cases like what were the key milestones and phases for which we built the professional services engagement, right? So I'm not sure if it's on Ignite or not, but oftentimes we have a PS team that would come along. And so if we're not clear on like, okay, what users are benefiting at what stages, probably have a miss at some point. So if it is with us, I would welcome a dialogue and see if I can help escalate. But I think if leadership is not seeing it, yeah, I think by nature, we're not done with the project, right? We're still midway through. The results will come. I think in certain solutions, right, you need to have a full deployment for you to actually see the results. So again, it depends. It could be, this question could be unpacked in a number of different ways. But if it happens to be, with us, I would love to support and help if I can. But yeah, I think it's really interesting with leadership. Yeah, they're certainly under the gun, making sure they spend the dollars wisely. But I think level setting and expectation management, managing up, maybe we call it, is something that also could be revisited.
Very cool. All right. So we'll give it a couple, 15 or 30 seconds here, see if we get any other questions to come in. Otherwise, I think, Kevin, just want to thank you for time and sharing your expertise with us. Look forward to continuing the conversation. Please go ahead and drop us a note at secure@itsasap.com if you'd like to go ahead and schedule that discovery process. I'll go ahead and pop that email in the chat there. That'll get the process started. Where you can schedule some time at your convenience, and we're happy to help you out with the modernization process and get you guys to a point where you're efficient, productive, and secure. So I guess with that, we'll wrap things up. Kevin, thanks, Glenn. Appreciate the conversation, and we'll see you next go round.
Thanks, Rob. Glad to be here and proud to be partnering with you.
Take care, man. Take care.
You.
Bye, everybody.